What if every ballot you cast is actually a permission slip for your own subjugation? For many of us, that question hits like a punch to the gut. Yet it's the starting point for a brutal look at democracy's darker side. If the idea provokes you, pause for a second. Hit the like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good intellectual shakeup, and subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive. Back to the unsettling thought. In November 2016, millions of Americans watched election night like any other, only to feel something fracture inside when the results rolled in. Decades of quiet faith in the ballot box suddenly turned to doubt. Could ordinary citizens really wield political power responsibly? The cognitive whiplash was savage and revealing. But disillusionment with democracy isn't new. More than 2,400 years ago, Plato watched a democratic jury put his mentor Socrates to death and concluded, "Popular rule doesn't free us from tyranny. It simply wraps tyranny in a feel-good story." Modern psychology backs him up. Remember Solomon Asch's 1950s line-length experiments? 75% of participants agreed with a clearly wrong majority rather than trust their own eyes. If we abandon basic perception under group pressure, how can we trust millions of strangers to pick wise leaders? It gets worse. In 2006, Emory University neuroscientists scanned the brains of die-hard partisans. When presented with evidence that their favorite candidates contradicted themselves, reasoning centers stayed quiet while emotional circuits lit up like fireworks. The takeaway? Our brains reward us for ignoring inconvenient facts. Manipulation isn't an accident of democracy, it's baked into our wiring. Here's the clever trick. Democracy sells the feeling that you matter. Casting a vote feels empowering compared to secret police and overt censorship. Yet, as political scientist Stephen Levitsky notes, competitive authoritarian systems use elections as safety valves. You vent your anger at the polls, but the underlying power structure barely twitches. Plato warned that the heaviest penalty for refusing to lead is to be ruled by someone inferior. Today, we rarely notice how unqualified our leaders are, because we chose them. The casino lets you pull the lever, but the house still counts the chips. Worse still, democracy's information overload overwhelms the brain's prefrontal cortex, the part that handles critical thought, and hands the steering wheel to raw emotion. Psychologists call it choice overload, too many options, too little clarity. Enter the charismatic simplifier, the demagogue, who promises to think for you. Venezuela's Hugo Chavez won power not by tanks but by offering exhausted voters cognitive relief. By the time his supporters smelled tyranny, they were emotionally invested and couldn't admit the mistake. This pattern keeps repeating. Around the globe, electorates gravitate toward leaders who shine at campaigning, confidence, catchy slogans, feel-good vibes, but stumble at governing, which demands humility and complexity. The very skills that win elections often sabotage effective leadership. So where does that leave us? Democracy can foster dignity and liberty, but only if we stay painfully self-aware of its psychological traps. The moment we outsource our thinking for emotional comfort, we volunteer for polite dictatorship. Stay skeptical, question your impulses, and if you found value in this exploration, remember, like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep challenging the stories that govern us before they govern us into submission. Plato captured this perfectly in his ship of fools metaphor. Picture a ship at sea. The passengers all get to vote on where it goes. There's a trained navigator on board, someone who understands currents, wind patterns, and celestial navigation. But he sounds cautious, even uncertain, when explaining the complexities of the journey. Meanwhile, a few loud, confident passengers promise smooth sailing and clear skies. They mock the navigator's warnings as elitist nonsense. Who do you think the passengers choose to follow, and what happens to the ship? Plato's answer was radical: philosopher kings, leaders chosen not for their popularity, but for their wisdom. It sounds elitist, until you stop and think about how we treat expertise everywhere else in life. We don't vote on surgical techniques or airplane designs. We don't crowdsource engineering blueprints. We defer to those who've spent years, even decades, mastering their field. But in politics, expertise becomes a liability. Why? Because real experts sound uncertain. They hesitate, they acknowledge complexity, they admit what they don't know, and this triggers something deep inside us: ambiguity, aversion. We hate uncertainty, we crave confident answers, even if they're wrong. The 2008 financial crisis is a textbook example. Economists had been warning for years about the housing bubble, but they sounded academic and unsure. Meanwhile, people with no economic training made bold claims that housing prices would rise forever. The markets and the public rewarded confidence over competence until the whole thing collapsed. But this isn't just psychology, it's structural. Democratic systems don't just fail to reward wisdom, they actively select against it. Think about the kind of person who thrives in politics: someone willing to campaign for years, to raise obscene amounts of money, to make promises they know they can't keep. That takes a specific kind of personality: narcissism, comfort with manipulation, and an almost pathological tolerance for contradiction. These aren't bugs in the system, they're features. Now ask yourself honestly, are your political leaders the wisest, most competent people you know? Or are they just the most ambitious, the most persuasive, the most willing to tell you what you want to hear? Plato's philosopher kings weren't meant to be flawless. They were people who understood the burden of power, not those who craved it. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does." Real leadership isn't about popularity. It's about prioritizing truth even when it's inconvenient. And that's exactly what democratic systems make nearly impossible. Plato's famous cave allegory, it's more than a metaphor, it's a warning. We're all prisoners now, but the chains look different. We sit in front of screens, we scroll, we consume shadows, content, headlines, videos, carefully selected by algorithms to keep us comfortable, outraged, and most importantly, engaged. And here's the chilling part: the shadows are personalized. You're not just seeing what everyone else sees. You're seeing a version of reality that's been tailor-made for you, based on your clicks, your fears, your beliefs. That's what the Cambridge Analytica scandal revealed. Using Facebook data, political consultants built psychological profiles to target voters with custom-crafted messages. Anxious people got fear-based content. Narcissists were flattered with messages that made them feel smart and special. Depressed users got content that confirmed their darkest thoughts. This wasn't propaganda for the masses, it was psychological warfare, custom-built for each mind. And this creates what psychologists now call confirmation bias on steroids. In the past, propaganda meant forcing everyone to see the same message. Today, we let people choose their own reality, and that illusion of choice makes manipulation even stronger. The result? A deeply polarized society where people don't just disagree, they live in completely different informational worlds, different facts, different experts, different moral frameworks. Each side is certain they're right, each side feels fully informed, and both are being subtly controlled by forces they don't even recognize. This is happening right now to you as you watch this. Algorithms are studying your behavior. Political operatives are refining their strategies. Your entire media ecosystem is being shaped to influence your thoughts without your awareness. And that's why debates don't work anymore, why fact-checking feels useless. Because when people are confronted with information that contradicts their version of reality, they don't change their minds, they double down. They experience the backfire effect and become more convinced than before. Plato predicted this dynamic too. They deem him their worst enemy who tells them the truth. In today's world, truth-tellers don't need to be silenced by force. They're buried by algorithms, ignored, shadow-banned, labeled irrelevant. The system doesn't need to censor dissent. It just makes sure no one sees it. And that is how control survives, even in a world that tells you you're free. It only takes one subtle tactic to keep dissent in check. Make speaking up feel socially awkward and psychologically costly. The Weimar Republic shows what happens next. In the 1920s and early 30s, Germany had free elections, civil liberties, and a noisy public sphere. Yet when economic disaster and political chaos hit, voters didn't resist authoritarianism. They embraced it. Why? Because oppression never marches in wearing chains. It strolls in offering quick relief from complexity. When your prefrontal cortex is overloaded, too many choices, too much uncertainty, the limbic system takes over. It begs for clarity, certainty, simplicity. Hitler gave Germany exactly that. Don't worry about economics. Don't worry about foreign policy. We'll handle it all. You just follow. The story keeps repeating. Athenians killed Socrates not out of cruelty, but because his questions made them confront their own ignorance, something democratic cultures quietly discourage. The Roman Republic slid into empire through the same doorway, charismatic figures promising bread, circuses, and easy answers. Today is no different. Around the world, electorates are choosing strong men who promise to think for them, decide for them, and carry the heavy questions they're too tired to answer. Plato saw it coming and proposed the noble lie, shared myths crafted by wise leaders to hold society together. Critics call that proto-fascist, yet every system runs on myths. Every opinion counts equally. Elections can solve any problem. Majority rule always yields wisdom. These stories aren't fully true or false. They're psychological lubricants, making participation feel noble and comforting. But when reality refuses to cooperate, cognitive dissonance sets in. We blame parties, leaders, or factions while clinging to the myth that the framework itself is flawless. That treadmill of disappointment fuels instability and clears the stage for demagogues who swear they can finally make the myths real. Institutional design amplifies the illusion. On camera, elected officials debate headline issues. Off camera, the real levers, monetary policy, regulatory codes, international treaties, sit in the hands of unelected technocrats. Take the European Union. The Commission drafts and enforces laws, yet it's appointed, not elected. The Parliament, the body voters choose, has far less pull than most citizens assume. National politicians campaign on grand promises, then defer to supranational rules they can't touch. Democracy looks like power diffused. In practice, power migrates beneath the surface, technical, insulated, quietly decisive. So when freedom begins to feel exhausting, remember, the most efficient control doesn't silence you. It convinces you to stop talking. Voters are offered the illusion of influence, while the most important decisions are made far away from their reach. This disconnect is what political scientists call the democratic deficit, a system where unelected individuals and institutions make the real calls, while elected officials, those we believe we're holding accountable, have limited control over the outcomes that shape our lives. Meanwhile, the loudest parts of democracy, campaigns, debates, elections, consume massive public attention. They dominate the headlines, drain emotional energy, and create the feeling of engagement. But in terms of real policy, they're often little more than theater, and that's by design. This structure serves a purpose. It offers emotional satisfaction. It gives us rituals, voting, debating, protesting, that make us feel empowered, while the core machinery of power remains untouched. It also creates a convenient trap. When the system fails, we don't question the system itself. We blame ourselves. We believe we chose the wrong leaders. We think, maybe next time it'll be different. So we double down, more voting, more transparency, more participation. But almost never do we stop and ask the harder question, is this system even capable of producing better outcomes? That's the brilliance and the danger of democratic psychology. It makes you complicit in your own powerlessness while convincing you that you're in control. Now, before we accept Plato's critique without question, let's acknowledge the counter-arguments. Economist Joseph Schumpeter offered one of the strongest. He argued that democracy isn't about citizens making wise policy decisions. It's about competition between elites. Just like in markets, this competition creates incentives for better leadership, even if voters don't understand the details. And there's some truth to this. Democratic systems, even when flawed, can enable peaceful transitions of power. They build in checks and balances. They offer feedback loops between rulers and the ruled. Sometimes they even produce surprisingly competent leadership, leaders willing to think long-term, like those behind the Marshall Plan or early environmental protections. But these successes don't invalidate Plato's insight. They just show that decline isn't guaranteed. It's just probable. Because the vulnerabilities Plato described, our psychological craving for simplicity, certainty, and emotional comfort, never go away. They're baked into the human experience. Of course, Plato's own solution, a society ruled by philosopher kings, has its flaws. How do you find truly wise rulers? Who decides who qualifies? And how do you prevent them from becoming disconnected or corrupted by power? Even Plato seemed to recognize that his ideal was more of a thought experiment than a political blueprint. So what do we do with this uncomfortable knowledge? We don't abandon political life. We approach it with eyes open. In Plato's cave allegory, the one who escapes the shadows isn't supposed to stay in the light. He's supposed to return and help others see, even if they hate him for it. That's the challenge, to engage with democracy not as blind believers, but as conscious participants. Stop expecting the system to deliver perfect justice or pure wisdom. Instead, understand what it really is, a method for managing human psychology, a tool for maintaining social order in an emotionally volatile species. Consciousness doesn't solve the system's flaws, but it does change your relationship to it. When you understand how leaders manipulate your emotions, when you recognize that political opinions often serve psychological needs more than rational ones, when you see how institutions are designed to channel dissent into harmless rituals, you gain something rare in modern politics: clarity. You become harder to manipulate, more resistant to certainty, more curious when challenged. You can vote, protest, speak out, not as a pawn in someone else's game, but as someone playing it with full awareness. This isn't about becoming jaded or cynical. It's about becoming deliberate. Plato believed political systems reflect the inner psychology of their citizens. If that's true, then democracy doesn't give us the leaders we deserve because of our virtues. It gives us leaders who match our cognitive weaknesses and emotional needs. We want to feel informed without doing the hard work of learning. We want to feel autonomous without accepting the responsibility that real freedom demands. We want confident leaders, simple answers, and someone else to blame when it all falls apart. Democracy delivers all of that beautifully. It offers the illusion of agency without the burden of consequence. It gives us moral superiority without moral consistency. And when things go wrong, it gives us scapegoats, never the system itself. But here's the turning point: awareness. When you stop expecting democracy to be what it promises, you can start engaging with what it really is. When you understand your own mental vulnerabilities, you can step back from emotional reflex and think more strategically. Because right now, as you're watching this, those same psychological pressures that pushed Germany into fascism, that broke Venezuela, that hollowed out democratic institutions across the globe, are shaping your country, your vote, your mind. Your social media feed is already being curated to deepen division and reinforce identity. The overwhelming complexity of modern life is already making you crave simple answers. And the demagogues, they're already here, offering relief, not oppression. Not because people are evil, but because people are exhausted, exhausted by constant choice, exhausted by complexity, exhausted by the responsibility of self-rule. So the question isn't whether modern democracy has become a polite dictatorship. Plato already answered that. The real question is, will you participate consciously or keep sleepwalking while real power operates quietly just out of reach? This isn't idealism versus cynicism. This is consciousness versus unconsciousness. Plato saw the danger over 2,000 years ago. He watched Athens fall for the same tricks. He knew we'd do it again. The difference now? Our illusions are more advanced, our manipulation more subtle, and our window for waking up smaller than ever. Your brain will want to reject this. It feels wrong. It feels uncomfortable. That feeling. That's exactly what Plato was talking about. Choosing to push through that discomfort. That's the first real act of freedom. The unexamined democracy is not worth preserving, and the unexamined citizen is not truly free. The most dangerous tyranny is the one that feels like freedom, and your brain is wired to love it. So question your assumptions, search for uncomfortable truths. The shadows are beautiful, but only the light can set you free. The cave is comfortable, the light is harsh, but the choice to step toward it, that choice is still yours, for now. If this message resonated with you, don't let it end here. Like the video to support this kind of content. Share it with someone who still believes the system is exactly what it claims to be. And subscribe for more deep dives that challenge the comfortable illusions we're taught to accept. Because the more of us who wake up, the less power those illusions hold.